not assignment statement, right? This type of problem is checking your ability to trace through the code, right? Now, why is this ability important in the Gen AI era, right? I mean, you might say, come on, AI is writing the code. Why do I have to learn how to go tuck tuck mentally trace through the code? Well, when you are using Gen AI to produce code, how do you know if that code is correct? I want you to be able to read that code and tracing through the code, if I tell you what the value of n is, like here, I tell you n is this, then I ask you to trace through this logic. That is like the simplest skill that you will need to develop to be able to understand the code, right? So code tracing, being able to do this mentally. I don't want you to do this for very complicated code, but I want you to know that it's an important skill for you to have, right? If you can say, okay, I don't understand how this code works, let me try it on an example. Like what would happen if n was 10? What would happen if n was -5, right? You should be able to mentally trace it, and that will give you an idea of what the code is doing in general. So it's a very important and a very useful skill, right? So please keep in mind that that's why we had this question, right? Okay, so just to make sure we're clear, and also just to go a little bit further than the lectures, that's one of the things we like doing in these sessions, right? So let's say I've completed the first two steps. So if you've understood how this works, this is the mental picture you should have. I have a label n attached to the object int 10, and I have a label m attached to the object int 11, right? I hope so far at least everybody is totally comfortable that that is what would happen at the end of the first two assignment statements. So here, if you try this in Python Tutor has done this step, it has done this step. The red arrow is on line 3. We're about to do this statement, n is equal to n plus 1, right? And again, we know the value of n after this. The current value of n is 10, right? N is referring to the integer 10. So 10 plus 1 is 11. The new value of n is going to be 11, right? So that's why m and n are both equal. That's what this question is saying. But let's go a little bit further, right? So in what way is n going to be 11, right? Is it the case that this integer object, which is currently referring to the object 10, is it the case that that integer object is going to be changed to 11, right? So this used to be the integer 10. Is it the case that when I do n equal to n plus 1, this 10 changes in value to 11? That is possibility 1, possibility A. Okay. Possibility B is that it's not the existing object that got changed, it's a brand new object that was created. A new int 11 object is created. So the picture might look like this, but this is a brand new object. The old int 10 has gone away and a new integer object has been created. Possibility C is that Python is going to recycle the existing object int 11. After all, there already is one. So possibility C is that this n is not pointing to a new integer object. It is pointing to the old one. It's recycling it, right? So I want you to think about this. So here are three possibilities of what will happen when I do n is equal to n plus 1. So why don't you in the chat tell me if you believe statement A or statement B or statement C. While you're thinking about it, I'm going to quickly go over the three things one more time. So statement A is saying that you used to have this int 10 object, right? And now what has happened is that this 10 has changed in value from 10 to 11. The object remains the same, but option A is saying this 10 will change to 11. That is option A. Option B is a brand new object will get created with the value 11. And option C is no brand new object will get created. It's just that this label will move from what it used to be to this because we already have an int 11 object. So what is the meaning of n is equal to n plus 1 here? So some of you are saying, so A, B, C, we have a few answers. And you can see very clearly that there is a mixture of answers. Even if you haven't put your answer on the chat, you can see that there's some B's, there's some A's, there are some C's, right? So this is evidence for you that, this is not an easy thing to answer, right? I mean, I'm giving you three possibilities here, and as a group, we're not clear. Those of you who have voted, you said some of you think A, some of you think B, some of you think C, right? So you can see that in these video lectures of mine, I'm giving you some basic concepts, right? But there are going to be so many questions that will not be answered by the videos. I'm giving you the tools to explore this yourself, right? So suppose you wanted to know what is the answer to this, right? Please write this little piece of code out in Python Tutor, right? Please click through it, right? And see if you get this picture. If you don't get this picture, if you end up getting one of the earlier pictures, right, that we had here, right, either, I mean, a picture like this, right, then you know that this last option is not true, right? Uh, on the other hand, if you get the picture like this, then you know that the first two options are not true, right? So this is an interesting question, right? And I'm waiting to see. Let's see. So we've got a good mixture of A's, B's, and C, right? Right. Akshara is saying A, B, and C are all true, right? Akshara, they can't all be true because they're different, right? Um, um, and by the way, I just want to acknowledge. So one way to check this is with Python Tutor. Chaitanya has posted a little bit of Python code where he's looking at the ID of every object to see is it the same object or a different object, right? So this is another a more advanced way that Chaitanya has posted on the chat for checking if like checking what the answer might be, right? So I'm going to leave this to you as a mystery, right? It's not a very big mystery. You can try running this on Python Tutor, right? You can try using the ID function, which you have learned about, to figure out if you get a new object or an existing object. But try this out. If you think this question is interesting, and clearly we have different answers here, right? Lots of people have different answers. Then this may be a question that you want to think about, right? And I would like you to try it for this piece of code. And what you will find is you will get one answer. And then, very, very interestingly, if you change the value of n, for example, if you try the same experiment, but with a bigger number like 1000, you'll get a different answer. Okay, so this is the strange part of it, right? Python, it turns out, it tries to do some recycling. So for small values of 10, like 10, you actually do get this, right? Now, those of you who answered C, some of you might have known this, but some of you may have just guessed it, right? So it ends up doing this, but it only does this if the value of n is in some limited range where Python can recycle objects. If you try it for a bigger number like 1000, you will find that Python doesn't recycle the object, and then you get something different, right? So here's the important thing to keep in mind, right? This is an example of something that is, I'm giving this to you, I'm sharing this to you, right? Like this basic level of detail, I would like all of us to be able to get comfortable with. But there is much, much more to learn about Python that we will not be able to do in 8 weeks, right? And this is an example of one of those things. And just because I've talked about it in this live lecture, I still feel it's too advanced to, for example, ask this to you on an exam or a later quiz or something like that. This is very complicated, right? But there is so much more to learn about this language and about computing in general, right? So I hope you find this interesting, right? So the answer to the specific question I asked is amongst these options, it is C, but only if n is very small. Okay. Let's see. There was a question, Ridhiman saying, I had a question about the use of AI can easily understand code. How do I make myself better at coding? This is what this course is about, Ridhiman. It's about giving you some skills that are still relevant in this Gen AI era. Okay. Question you have about registered certificate exam, that again I would request you to post to NPTEL, right? How to do it. How do you get access to Gen AI? There are all kinds of freely available tools. Of course, everybody knows about ChatGPT, but as a programmer, you can also use more coding specific tools as the lectures talk about, right? Okay, and there are paid tools, but there are also some free tools which we can use as students. Okay, okay. So I hope this first question was clear. I mean, the basic question hopefully had a very straightforward answer, but I wanted to let you know that there's actually more going on here, which you can explore. Okay. Okay, moving on to question 2, right? So your friend does some experiments, right? There's a whole bunch of questions like this where your friend does some experiments. So in this case, they've checked n true division 2. Is that equal to n floor division 2? And they found out the answer is true, right? So then what is the value that n could have, right? And there's a bunch of options, and only the even values of n are true, right? Why? Because if n is an odd value, like let's say 1, then 1 true division 2 is 0.5, whereas 1 floor division 2 is 0, and those are not equal, right? But the fact that it's true, even for the even values, may not be super obvious, right? So, for example, if I calculate the type of this expression, -2 divided by 2, right? That's a float, right? Because -2, true division 2 is -1.0, okay, which is of type float. And -2 floor division 2 is of type int. It's -1, right? Now you might say, well, how can a float and an int be equal? How come in this thing, that the experiment that we tried, how come this equality resulted in true? Well, even if two objects are of different types, in some cases, you can compare them and you will find that they have the same value. So -1.0, the float, and -1, the int, are objects of different types, but they have the same value. If you compare them with the test for equality, it will produce true, right? And the same thing applies to 0, and the same thing applies to 2. In all these cases, you will get a float on the left-hand side and an int on the right-hand side, but those will have the same value. On the other hand, if you tried the odd integers, you will get different values. You will lose the fractional component when you are doing floor division, always rounding towards -infinity. Okay. Now, important to keep in mind that if you actually tried this experiment, so here I'm saying print -1, and it shows -1. And then I say print -1.0, and it shows -1.0. And then I say print in quotes -1, the string -1. So you notice this also prints -1, and this int also prints -1. But the int -1 and the string -1 do not have the same value, okay? Even though they print the same way, okay? So it's important to keep this in mind, that when we are talking about do they have the same value, that is not the same thing as they print the same, right? You can have two values that are different, right? -1 the int and -1 the string do not have the same value. They don't have the same type, and they don't have the same value, right? But they're not equal, okay? Even if they print the same way, right? So it's important to keep this in mind. When you print a string, when you print a string, it doesn't put the quotations around it, right? So there are a few things here to keep in mind, right? Okay, there's some questions about how exactly this happens. So Ayush wants to know, is it because it is ASCII, right? So suppose I gave an incomplete answer. Let me first try and answer it incompletely, right? Suppose I say, oh, -1 the int and -1 the string can't be equal because they have different types. Well, that's not a complete answer, because look, -1 the int and -1.0 the float are equal, even if they have different types, right? So you have to look at how two objects are compared for equality, right? Internally, what Python does is it says, okay, are these things that are these two objects on the left hand right hand side of the equality, are they of the same type? If they are, great, I can use whatever it means for this object to be equal to that object, because all the rules are the same for both types of objects. Both are ints, or both are strings, or both are floats, etc. Right? It becomes a little bit tricky when the objects are of different type, like in this example and this example, right? So for some types, some pairs of objects, Python says, no, 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 you can't compare them. So if you give me an object, let's say of type string and an object of type int, the answer is definitely going to be false because you can't compare these at all. Okay? So certain types of objects are not comparable. You cannot compare them. You cannot test them for equality or greater than. That Python doesn't allow it, right? Whereas certain mixed types are comparable. So floats and ints are a common example. And here you will see Akshara has put on the chat, right? The double equality performs type conversion, right? So what does that mean? It says, okay, on the left-hand side, I have an int. On the right-hand side, I have a float. These are of different types, but I will convert one of them to another, right? So in this case, it will convert the -1 int into a float, and then those two have the same value, and then this produces the answer true. Okay, so here again is something that is taking us much deeper than what the lecture allowed us to do, right? So I will give you these pathways. As I said, you must not view this course, this 8-week course, as, oh, now I have a complete understanding of AI and of Python and so on, right? It's a introduction to a very deep area, but hopefully we, like getting into a deep swimming pool, we start from the shallow end and we find our way and we enjoy swimming in the shallow end, and then gradually as we get more confident we can explore further. Okay. All right, so I hope that explanation helped. Again, let me know in the chat if there's something that we can't, right? So Mohammed Gufran says, because one is a string and the other is an int. Yes, so in some cases we can't compare two objects, right? And Nitish, again, this is what we're saying. So there are some rules in Python that certain types of objects, even if they are of different types, uh, can be compared, right? Now, I'm not asking you to memorize which pairs can be compared, which pairs can't be compared, right? I'm never going to ask you a question, let's say on an exam or a quiz, can I compare these two pairs of objects, right? Even in these quizzes, I'm suggesting to you, please try the experiment in the REPL, right? And let's learn together. So what have we learned from doing this experiment, right? We have learned that even though this object is of type float and this object is of type int, it is legal to compare them. We can compare them and get an answer true or false, right? So now that we know this, now that we've picked up this fact that we can compare ints and floats, we can keep this in mind, right? But I'm not going to ask you to memorize. Somewhere all these rules are given, right? But for this course, it's not my objective to have you sort of keep that in mind. Okay, I'm asking you to, let's go on this journey together. Let's explore this language, and we will now learn some interesting things about this language deeper than we explored in the video. And that's part of the fun of the live sessions, right? Those of you who are joining us live, you get to ask these questions and we get to have these conversations. Okay. All right, I will move on unless somebody requests me to rewind. So then there's three questions that or a little bit, maybe a little tricky or surprising, right? So we've learned about, order of precedence, right? So here, if because I have a multiplication that happens first, very similar to your BODMAS rules in school. So this is really n plus n square, and this is really 2n times n. So that's 2n squared. So how come n plus n squared is equal to 2n squared, right? So one way you can answer this is, just try out different values, plug them in here, and find out that in this case, 0 and 1 will work, right? That way of solving this particular problem is actually something I want you to do. I really want you to, as I said, code tracing, code comprehension is a skill that I'm trying to build through all these problems, right? I really am asking you to try and say, when you look at some code, I want you to be able to understand what it is doing. These small little pieces of code are designed to uh, give you practice in understanding code, right? This kind of code probably nobody cares about, right? But we're giving ourselves little practice problems to make sure we understand things. Like, for example, here, we must understand that stuff inside brackets is computed first, right? So we're doing that, right? So one way to solve this problem, which is actually the better way, is, okay, let's try n equal to -2. What is the left-hand side? The left-hand side is -2 plus -2 times -2. And this happens first because of the order of precedence, right? So that in the left-hand side, we are doing -2 times -2, which is +4. And then we're doing -2 plus 4, which is, of course, just 2. So the left-hand side is 2, the integer 2. And what is the right-hand side? -2 plus -2 is -4 times -2. So that is +8. So obviously 2 and 8 are not equal. So this is not the case, right? So you can just do that manually with tracing it on all these different values, and you'll realize that 0 and 1 work. Okay. Now, some of you might have been tempted to answer this question by kind of, the way we would do it in maths class, right? Like, this is like some equation, right? And you might have said, okay, this is n squared, this is 2n times n, so that's 2n square, right? And then, apply your rules of simplification, right? So this n square I bring on this side, so I'll get n is equal to n square, right? And when is n equal to n squared? Well, either n is 0 or n is 1. Right? I mean, both those will satisfy it, right? And so that is one way in which you could answer it, right? But I want you to keep in mind, please don't treat these kinds of things like maths equations, right? In this case, it worked, but in the next two examples, this same kind of reasoning doesn't really help, right? So let's look at those next two examples, right? So here again, I'm giving you something that looks like a maths equation, right? In this case, I'm telling you the answer is false, right? So the better way is to actually plug in all these values and see if it works, and you will find that these are the answers, right? But suppose I ignore that. Suppose I just try to, solve it like an equation, right? So it's saying this equation is false. So if I had to set it up like a math thing, I would say, okay, the left-hand side is n plus 2 times n, and the right-hand side is 2n times 2, so that's 4n. And it's false, so I'm saying they're not equal, right? So when is n plus 2n not equal to 4n? Well, let me simplify. The left-hand side is just 3n, and 3n is not equal to 4n. Okay. Now, maybe you can think, oh, I'll just cancel the n, and then I'll be left with 3 is not equal to 4, right? Well, obviously 3 is not equal to 4. And if that was the case, then you would say, well, when is 3 not equal to 4? Always. So maybe all these are true, right? No, but you can't just cancel the n, right? That is not a correct statement, because what if n was 0? Then you can't do divide by 0. I mean, this is all the maths stuff. So then you would maybe move the 3n onto the other side, and so you'd say, okay, n has to be not equal to 0, right? I mean, if you were to try to solve this like a maths equation, right? And so you say, oh, any value of n other than 0 will work, right? And then you would say, okay, so 0 doesn't work, but any other value other than 0 should be the correct answer, right? But that's not true either, right? For example, 0.0. Okay, you'll say 0.0 is of course same as 0. So we don't check this, we don't check this, but everything else is not equal to 0. But then we would miss this case, right? Empty string, right? Please remember, this is not doing uh, arithmetic if n is a string, right? All your friend has done is initialized n with some unknown value. Nobody said that n was initialized with an integer value or a floating point value, right? If we had initialized n with the empty string, what would have happened? This is empty string. 2 times empty string is also empty string. Why? Because 2 times a string is just that same string repeated twice. So you concatenate or plus them together, glue them together. So then you have 3 copies of the empty string. And 3 times an empty string is empty string. Similarly, 4 times an empty string is an empty string, right? So that is false, right? I mean, that equation is true. So it cannot be the empty string, right? So that is also ruled out. So the only values that n could take out of these is the 0.1 and the string 1. Okay, so that is the case, right? Um, okay, student PM wants to know about paying for the registration. Again, can you pose those questions to the NPTEL team, please? Okay. All right. So hopefully this is clear. V. Krishnan is saying unable to use Python tutor and code check. They're not paid sites. You should be able to access them. Can I request any other student who has been able to access the links that we have shared for Python tutor and code check? Can I just get a quick confirmation from at least one student that you were able to access the Python tutor or code check links that I have shared, right? If you can put a confirmation on the chat, then we know that, yeah. Okay, so thank you, Shivani. Shivani has confirmed that the links that we have shared are working. Chaitanya has confirmed as well. Mrigank also. So thank you. So lots of people have confirmed that they can access the links, V. Krishnan. So please do try it again. Okay. So I think they are shared. The links are shared, Krishnan, on the forum. Because they were not originally part of the videos. They should be now. I think I've requested the NPTEL team, and I'm sure they have either already done it or are soon going to do it. So you'll all have access to it, right? Okay, Ajit wanted me to clarify once again what happens with the empty string, and also there was a question about what happens with the string just one. Okay, so let me do it in reverse order. Let me start with the string just one, right? So what is the meaning of plus for strings? Remember, it's just gluing it together, right? So let's focus on the left hand side. If I take the string, just the string one, and I multiply it with two, then I get the string 1 1, right? Because I take two copies of one and I glue them together, right? So then I'm saying, what is the string one plus the string 1 1? So that is the string 1 1 1, three copies of one, right? Now apply the same reasoning here. You'll take the string one plus the string one, which is two ones, 1 1. And then you will take 1 1 and 1 1 and glue them together. So you'll get 4 ones. So the left hand side will be 3 ones, the right hand side will be 4 ones, and that is why the answer is false, right? So one of the values that n could have had is this. Okay. On the other hand, if I had n equal to the empty string, the left hand side becomes 3 copies of the empty string, and the right hand side becomes 4 copies of the empty string, all glued together. But empty string and empty string, if I glue it, I'll still get the empty string. So it doesn't matter if I glue it 3 times, 4 times, 100 times, I will still only get the empty string, right? So I hope that made sense. Why the only way we can get false here between the two string options, we can only get false for the non-empty string, right? There's nothing special about one. Any string that had something inside it would have resulted in false. When I try to see if 3 times n is equal to 4 times n, the answer would be false. Okay. So I hope that helped, right? Yeah. Someone wants to know about practicing full stack Java. This is not a course on that, so that you'll have to take somewhere else, right? Okay. All right. And similarly, this last one here, where we want to try and check for something, again, a very weird result, right? X plus y is equal to y plus x. False, right? Again, if x and y are integers or floats, right? Of course, this is going to be true, right? X plus y plus x should produce the same answer, right? But how come it's false? Well, there's some values. And again, the values are when they're strings, right? Again, if you think that, just try and solve this like an equation, right? I mean, again, you'll say x plus y and y plus x are not equal. Their answer is false. So if I start with x plus y and not equal to y plus x, and then I just use the rules of arithmetic, right? I mean, I put the x on this side, I'll get x minus x, and I'll put the y on this side, I'll get y minus y. So how can this happen? Well, then this would happen when 0 is not equal to 0, right? And 0 is is equal to 0. It's never not equal to 0. So then you say, oh, this is never true. Right? No, no, no. But it can be true here, right? And the reason this is breaking down is you can't do subtraction of strings, right? This kind of operation of moving something to the other side, if you're thinking like like normal mathematics equations and things like that, right? um, you will think, oh, then I can do this kind of operation. I can put the x on the side and I can subtract. But please remember, this is not numbers necessarily. X and y are labels attached to objects of who knows what type. It could be numbers like integers and floats, or it could be strings, and later we will see other types, right? And depending on the type of object that you are dealing with, some operations might be allowed, like plus is allowed, but minus of two strings is not allowed. If you try it out, right? If you try it out, in the Python tutor shell, what happens if I do 0 minus 0? You get an error message, and it says you cannot do minus for string and string, right? It's a very scary looking error message. Unsupported operand type, right? So the operator is minus, and the operand is the thing that you're trying to do the minus on, right? So it says string and string, you can't do minus. Okay. So try and see, can you do it with maybe string and int? Can you do it with int and string? Try it out, right? And you will see if what kinds of operations are allowed for strings. You can plus two strings. You cannot do string plus int. You cannot do string minus string. And like that, some operations are not allowed, right? And again, we're trying to build our understanding of code. If somehow we saw this kind of expression, x plus y, we have to think, oh, if these x and y are strings, then this is really gluing it together. If on the other hand, x and y are numbers, then it's the usual notion of addition. Okay. So we're trying to understand trying to understand this concept of plus. Okay. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. Okay, again, let me know if not. Okay, so moving on to question 6. This was perhaps a very easy one, but again, just to show a few little things. So I try to do OR of A with O spelled capital, and then I get some sort of error, right? I get this thing. So again, the skill I want here, I'm trying to develop is, I hope you're actually trying this out, right? Because I need you to be able to, when your code produces some sort of error, you should be able to understand not only the code, but also some of the error messages, right? So sometimes the error messages, as we have seen, are tricky. So I'm not going to expect you after 8 weeks to be able to figure out super complicated error messages or error messages that we have never seen. But in this case, hopefully the error message was quite readable. Remember, we have said that Python is case sensitive, right? It matters. There's a difference between lowercase ord, which is a built-in function, and uppercase ord, right? And you can see that in the error, the name error that you're getting, that this is not defined. And now, since the error message said, did you mean in quotes ord? That's why I made some of the options in quotes ord. Again, I want you to be able to understand that, that's not how you can call a function, right? Because the minute I put something in quotes, that's a string, right? And I'm trying to call the built-in function called ord, not a string ord, right? These things don't make any sense, right? So the only correct answer is ord of little a. Okay. Again, hopefully that made sense. Okay. All right. Taking a look at question 7. This was tricky because it looks right. And remember, this is a skill I want you to develop, right? Just because some code looks right, it doesn't mean we should just look at it and say, oh, of course it does this, it does that, right? I mean, here I'm saying radius is equal to input of something. I put radius as 0.5. And now what is 2 times radius, right? Well, 2 times half is 1, right? So maybe some of you thought, oh, I'll get either this or this. And so then maybe you thought a little bit more, said, oh, wait a minute, he's got 0.5. So if I do 2 times a floating point value, I won't get the integer 1, I'll get the floating point value 1.0. So you may have thought about that, right? But please keep in mind, the input function always returns a string. If you want to do calculation with it, right, you have to treat it like a number. You have to say something like int of input or float of input, this nested function idea, right? But right now, radius is just a string, right? So now what do we mean 2 times a string? Well, just glue it together. So if it was 0.5, you'll get 0.5, 0.5, right? It looks very funny, but that's just 0.5 glued together twice, right? So this was a tricky one. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's a string. Exactly. Right. Input will just produce a string, right? So here again, we're understanding the code, right? Uh, if I had done this and the code is not working, can you read the code and say, okay, why is it not working? What is going on over here? You are comprehending the code, right? Now, if you were trying to do this kind of a calculation with, some AI, it's not going to make this mistake, right? It knows enough about code that, Python's input function returns a string. It's not going to straight away try and do mathematics with it, right? Unless you literally want to double the string, right? So it will convert it probably into a float if you want to, deal with fractional values and so on, right? But the important thing is for us to, just because the code looks right, we shouldn't just automatically trust, this is just reading that string and then reading that number and then we're multiplying it. If you want it to be a number, then you must convert it into a number, right? So Akshara is saying it's clear now, right? So please look out for this, right? See, these quizzes are also an opportunity for you to understand a little bit about your course instructor, right? So this is the first time we are interacting to know most of you. Of course, there are a large number of us in this course. I don't know most of you, and so you have. If I was a teacher who you were familiar with, you would say, I know he asks these kinds of questions. He asks these kinds of questions, right? Now we are learning about each other through these quizzes. I want you to get some familiarity with the kinds of questions I am asking you, right? I'm not asking you questions that are super long, super tricky, right? Uh, I mean, I'm not asking questions that are super long, but they might be a bit tricky, right? So they might make you think carefully, right? So the worst thing you can do on the quiz questions and the exam questions, the single worst thing is kind of try and do some sort of pattern match, right? Please keep in mind, some of these options are going to look like they're the right answer. If you are not thinking carefully, you will try to rush to a pattern and say, that must be right? Sometimes that is correct. But please keep in mind, I'm giving you these questions so that you realize, no, 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 Viraj can be tricky. He can ask these kinds of questions. And these are some examples of those. Again, the idea is not to make your life miserable. The idea is to really get you to think carefully, right? Programming, it's a very, very careful task. You can't rush it. Okay. So I want you to have that, develop that sense of, look, I have to be very careful here. I shouldn't just blindly answer something, right? Just because it looks right? So that is important skill that we're trying to develop through these things. Okay. Okay. Um, Question 8. There are many options here, so the question looks long, but again, your friend is doing some experiment, right? And again, please remember, I'm never going to give you a question that requires you to mug up some facts about what the ordinal value of some number is and of some letter is and things like that. No, no, no. All that stuff will be given to you. The question will really be making you think, right? So here, for example, we have a nested function, right? So do you understand enough about code to remember that in a nested function, we always do the innermost thing first, right? So when it says we first evaluate blank 1, the innermost thing is max of 0. So that has to be blank 1, right? Any option that involves odd of something cannot be correct, right? Anything that involves max of something that is not the string 0 can be discarded, right? So we can get rid of every option except this, because we know that this is how the code works. We focus on the inner part when we're dealing with a nested function, right? So keep in mind, in the video, we give you some concepts, right? In these questions, we're testing if you understand those concepts, right? Nobody is going to simply ask you, oh, tell me what that concept is, right? We want you to go deeper than that. We want you to apply those concepts. So we learned about nesting. Now let's apply that concept here. Right? So we do the innermost thing. So the first thing we do, max of 0, right? So the first, evaluate max of 0, which is the value something. So what is the maximum of 0? This was actually the same kind of example was there in the lecture. So if you had watched that, this would have been clear. But again, what is the largest value? The two obvious answers are Z and R, but in the lecture we explained why it's actually R, right? So that was the option there. So blank 2 is R. And then we do ORD of R. And ORD of R happens to be 114, and that's why you get this answer. Okay. So again, hopefully this is very clear. Okay. Question 9 and 10 were just about good coding style, right? I wanted you to, and it's not comprehending code necessarily. It's just, do you know how to write good variable names? In this next week, we're talking about functions. Again, we're talking about good coding style for functions. So I want you to develop some good habits for writing good code, right? Just saying X is equal to input, something like this. This is a terrible choice of name. So instead of X, which of the following will be most appropriate, right? So here I want to bring your attention, especially those of you who are planning to take the exam, right? There will be some exam questions that are similar, right, to the quiz questions that we're doing, right? And this kind of terminology might show up on some of those exam questions as well, right? So when I'm saying which is most appropriate, it's possible that more than one of these are uh, allowed as variable names. For example, it turns out you cannot have a variable named return because that is a special word. It's what we call a keyword. So you cannot use that. But since Python is case sensitive, lowercase r return is different from uppercase r return. So you can actually use this as a variable name. It's not a very good name, but it's fine. It's legal. It's legal. But in this particular case, which is the most appropriate, we have to remember, there are some rules about what is legal and not legal, but there are also some good coding styles that we follow as Python programmers. And you will remember from the lecture, we said try to avoid capital letters in your variable name, right? So we try not to do that. So this is certainly possible, but it is not appropriate. The most appropriate one amongst these would be something like response, right? And of course, there are many other words you could think about. I just gave that, right? This one, I never talked about this in the lectures, but again, I want you to, while we're doing a quiz, you should feel free to try this in the REPL. Can I declare a variable with these dash signs? And it turns out you can't. That's not allowed. You can use underscore on the keyboard. This is the shift plus the dash that will give you the underscore. So that is allowed, but you cannot use dashes or hyphens as the names of variables, right? At least in Python. There are other programming languages which allow you to use dashes in the name of the variables, but not Python. Okay. Okay, good. And then a similar question, although in this case, I made a very, very small technical error in the question. I only realized it later. I don't know if any of you caught it, right? So what happens when you do something like float of input of this, right? The first thing that gets printed is not just 66. I mean, it's not just waiting for you to type. First thing that gets printed is it repeats all this stuff, right? So I really should have written it like this: net import value in lakhs, colon, and then 66.5. I did do this on question 9, right? Do you want to return? And I said, do you want to return? Yes, right? But I forgot to do it here, right? So there was actually a small error in the question. I don't know if any of you saw it, but there's thousands and thousands of you, so maybe somebody probably did see it, and that was a small mistake in the question. But basically, it's the same type of question, which is the most appropriate name, right? And again, we cannot use import, for example, because that is a reserved word, a keyword, right? We try to avoid capital letters, right? It's perfectly okay to use underscore, right? And so this and this are probably the most preferred, but which is the most appropriate? Clearly this, right? Because niv, I mean, who can read niv, right? Again, keep in mind, uh, it's a very easy bad habit to form. I'll just call my variable p or q or x or something small. Who's going to type net, import, value? It's so much effort to type, right? But keep in mind that if you give meaningful variable names, it will help anybody who reads the code, including your AI. So there's a smart way of being lazy. If you want to be lazy, there's a smart way of being lazy, is use good names. Then your AI will help you. And then later, when you read the code or your friend reads the code, they will find it easier to read, right? So if you want to be quick and efficient, or lazy, if you want to think of it that way, there is a smart way of doing it and a silly way of doing it, right? Writing variable names like p and q is very silly in some sense, right? Because later you'll have to fight it. Later you won't know what you meant. What was p again? What was q? What is niv? I have no idea what this is, right? So it is going to make your life much harder later. It'll also make it much harder for your AI to give you help, right? So Ayush wants to know, right? Not even camel casing. Yeah. Again, Ayush, it's not like it's illegal. It's perfectly okay to use. It's just that in the Python community, people don't do it. Right now, every community forms their own rules, and we say, oh, no, no, this person who's come from outside the community is not following our rules, right? They don't know our rules, right? So all human communities form certain rules that these are just, polite society. This is how we do it, right? So in if you're a Java programmer, for example, they like using camel casing, right? So if you're coming from that community and now you're coming into this Python community, you might say, oh, how silly these Python people are. Why don't they use camel casing? There's nothing wrong with it, right? But this particular community has settled on this style, right? So one just has to sort of say, okay, that's the community's rules. So if you want to play nicely with other members of this community, this is the preferred thing, right? But technically speaking, there's nothing wrong with this. It's absolutely legal as a name. Even this is absolutely legal as a name. But the most appropriate, keeping in mind all the things we have said about the rules of Python and the common, what we say, the etiquette of Python, the best one from that perspective is this. That's the most appropriate one, right? Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, right? Yeah, okay, good. All right. Okay, so that was the quiz. Hopefully that was fairly straightforward, right? I want to spend a few minutes talking about some of the other content that is there in the coming week, right? We've talked about, we start talking about functions. We talk about, having this purpose statement inside the function. There's something called the doc string, which is supposed to explain why the function was written. And one of the things we said in this slide was, why don't we like this doc string? Well, this starts getting into, how it works, right? And then there were some other issues that we pointed out, the name of the function is not a very good one and so on, right? But by the way, I didn't say this in the video, but I hope some of you realized that this function actually doesn't compute the next even number, right? It actually computes the next odd number, right? Let's try an example. Let's do code tracing, right? So let us say I give you the number n equal to 2, right? So n equal to 2, right? What will happen? We will return this expression. How do we evaluate the expression? Well, we said we have to evaluate the stuff inside the brackets first. So what is 2 remainder 2? That is 0. So if n is 2, 2 remainder 2 is 0. So this is 2 plus 1 plus 0. So that is 3. So if somebody calls this next function and says, what is next of 2? N will be 2. but this function will return the value 3. So it actually returns the next odd integer. You should actually try it out. What about when n is minus 2, right? What does it return in that case, right? If what I said is correct, then the next odd number after minus 2, bigger than minus 2, is minus 1. But try it out. Try it out if you actually get that, right? So this anyway, this function was wrong for many reasons. One of the reasons is the friend was trying to calculate the next even number, but actually the logic is for the next odd number, right? And the better name is actually a next odd integer. Okay, so again, some of you probably caught that while watching the video, but if not, I just wanted to point this out, right? This example was trying to show something very important, something that we repeat all through the course. Here is a very fancy way of trying to say what this function is supposed to do. We have used a good function name. We have used what's called type hinting. Those of you who haven't seen this particular video, maybe this is unclear, but hopefully many of you have watched the videos, right? So this is a good function name, good type hinting for both the arguments and the return value, right? So the whole signature line is high quality, right? Then inside these triple quotes are my doc string explaining the high level purpose of this function, why it was written. It's written to check if n is an integer multiple of m. That is its purpose, right? And inside this doc string are some examples or doc tests, right? Explaining how this works. So for example, is 10 a multiple of 5? Of course it is a multiple of 5 because 2 times 5 is 10. So then the answer is true, right? Is 10 a multiple of 0? Of course not, because no matter what number we multiply 0 with, we will never get 10. We will only remain with 0. Okay, so those are the two examples. But what this screenshot was trying to show is even though you've done so much work, you've explained to the AI what you want. I want a function is multiple. Then you press enter, your cursor is blinking here. Your AI is suggesting this code. And this code doesn't even work for one of the given examples. Why? Because if I call it with 10, 0, n will be 10, but m will be 0. And you cannot do 10 remainder 0. You will get a 0 division error. So this will not work. Okay, it will not produce the answer, right? So then we were manually correcting it to use what is called an if condition. Again, this lecture explained what if conditions are. So I write if m is 0, then immediately return an answer, right? And very, very important, I wanted to make sure everybody understood this. If this condition is true, we will return, and return means we're immediately out of the function. And that means the only way we can come to this line is if m is not 0. If m is 0, we do line 10 and we leave the function. If m is not 0, we skip around this. And since m is not 0, it's perfectly okay to do remainder with m, right? The danger of doing remainder with m is only if m is 0, then you're doing divide by 0. But if m is not 0, this is perfectly sensible. And then you can check this condition is either true or false. So it's this Boolean value, either true or false. Okay. So I hope that made sense. We're running short on time. So if there are any specific questions that people had, I'd rather open it up for that, and let's try and see if we can answer some questions, right? Mrigank wants to do an internship at IISc. You'll have to reach out to people at IISc, Mrigank. Most faculty do offer internship opportunities. So look out on people's website. In general, this is not just for IISc. Once you know something about a domain and you want to work with someone who is doing work in that domain, please try and contact them, right? Now, sometimes it's not easy because so many emails people get. So what many people do is they have some sort of process available, like on their website, they may have a link saying, if you want to apply for an internship, apply here. That's usually the best way of doing it, right? The second best way is when you get an opportunity, in your college, people come visit, give talks, try and talk to people. It's much easier for all of us to be able to respond to students if we have some personal connect. That's my only other advice, right? Okay, Arihant wants to know a question. I have no idea what is the best place for publication of research on cosmology. Arihant, I don't know. It's not my area of expertise. I have absolutely no idea, right? Okay, if there are questions related to the course, let's try and address those. I have a few more selected slides from the rest. What I can do is quickly show you some things, right? Again, when you read about functions, uh, these are all important concepts. If any of these concepts are not clear, I can try and explain them, right? The idea of doing refute problems is hopefully explained very clearly. I want you to be able to uh, develop that skill. Okay, let's see. Akhil has posted a question on the chat, right? So Akhil has said, let's read. He's got a lot of things here. So Akhil wants to know, okay, so 0.1 plus 0.1 is equal to 0.2. That turns out to be true. 0.1 plus 0.2 is equal to 0.3. That turns out to be false, right? So you can see that things are really, really strange, right? There is a logic to it, Akhil, but that logic is so complex that it is not easy for us to have a simple mental model, right? I would love to say to you, Akhil, here is why it's happening, and now use this general concept, and you will be able to figure out all these things. With floating point numbers, there isn't a simple mental model we can keep in our heads. So that is what I would like you to take away from this, right? If you want to write code that deals with floating point numbers, right? Let's say maybe you're developing some software for ISRO and there are satellites and things like that, or you're doing some simulation or something like that, and you need to use floats, right? Many people care about dealing with floats. Then what I want you to take away from this course is, look, I have to deal with floats. That means I must learn much more about floats, because what Professor Viraj taught in that course was not enough. All he taught us was be careful of floats, because floating point numbers are weird. And that 8-week course only taught me that. Floating point numbers, I put a little warning label on it. No, no, please be careful of floating point numbers. If you take that point away from this course, I will be very happy, because there's much more to learn about floats. Okay. All right. Nimisha wants to know, will I be sharing the PPT? So Nimisha, we were discussing this right at the start of the course. Um, I would much rather you spend effort, you and all the students spend effort creating your own notes. You will learn much more, right? So, I mean, I've created the slides, I can share the slides, but I'm doing it as an educator because I want you to benefit. So I feel you will really benefit by having these videos, and I would like you to make your own notes, right? It's just because I care about your learning, and I think your learning will be better if you do it. Okay, so good. I'm glad, right? Okay, officially we're out of time. So thank you all. I hope it was useful going over these quizzes, right? Look out for the next quiz. It will be released shortly, right? I mean, later tonight. Okay. All right. Take care. Oh no, actually, I think it's officially released tomorrow. So you'll see it tomorrow. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye bye.